passed one initially in 2002. Didn't work so well. Again, we're trying to stomp out this thing that we're trying to say is a behavior, but it's really a label. So the legislature amended it in 2006 and changed the definition. They amended it again in 2008, changing the definition again. It was changed again. Massive changes came into Connecticut's law in 2011, and again the definition was changed. In 2014, they made more changes to the point where we now have 5 different statutes in which parts of the bullying stuff rests. And I have a little handout called Practical Steps for Parents in dealing with this, which I'll pass out later. Some of what I'm saying is summarized there. So in 2014, we now have 5 statutes. In 2015, the legislature tried yet again to change the statutes. I think in 2014, everybody wanted to go on record saying I'm against bullying. Well, who isn't, right? Who isn't against bullying? I think what's very interesting about this whole arena is because of media attention to bullying. We hear about it all the time, we talk about it all the time. Well, in reality, in Connecticut, because I get to look at some of the statistics, in the last 3 years, I mean, you would think this is an epidemic, just this horrible epidemic we're dealing with. But in Connecticut, over the last three years, because that's when I can look at similar data. And by the way, this is the same nationally, so we're not any different than any other state. When you look at the number of children labeled bullies in Connecticut over the last 3 years, the percentage of our population has not changed 1/100%. And you're all sitting down because that number is 0.13%. Not 10%, but 0.13%. Not even 1%, 0.1% of students in the state are labeled bullies. Now, how could that be? How could that possibly be? Certainly, we have more bullies than just 0.1%. And I would agree. Whatever bullying is, there's bullying going on. But we have 50 states, and at this point, 50 different definitions. In fact, the very last state to pass an anti-bullying law was Montana in the fall of 2015. So now all 50 states have a bullying definition, and every one of the states defines it differently. There is not a definition of bullying. The closest thing you're going to find if you ask folks who, I don't want to say do what I do, but really are engaged in this work, the closest thing is that bullying is about abuse of power in a school context. So true bullying is going to be more like domestic violence, child abuse, and that kind of thing than it is the day-to-day interactions of children as they're trying to figure out how they treat one another. Because it's all about relationships. It's all about how we treat one another. And we can get stuck in trying to stamp out bullying, which is what's been happening throughout the nation in these anti-bullying laws. Stop bullying, we'll change the definition on you. Stop bullying, so it's like whack-a-mole, that's what I call it. You try to stomp it out here and it pops up here. And I try to counsel people that the best starting point to dealing with this arena is to stop using the label, stop using the word, and talk about the behaviors, and talk about what I call is the spirit of these anti-bullying laws, which is to create safe places for young people. Physically safe, emotionally safe, some commonalities. One of the things is that it appears none of them had an adult in school that they could talk to that cared about them. That's pretty scary. And we know that if you're highly connected to school, that helps you. So this becomes, I call it a roadmap, a really clear pathway toward what we have to do for young people. I have on the other side the things that lined up. They were all, if you say, think about a sense of belonging. Every single one of these kids who went out, and most of them are boys, by the way, almost all, virtually all. It's not that girls don't have issues, but this is boys who are told they're weak, they're sissies, they're gay, they're just not real boys. Go out and exhibit a heck of a lot of violence, because that's how you show you're a boy. But all of them said that they didn't feel as though they were a part of the school at all. They were totally alienated. They were too different for a school culture, and they felt outside of those boundaries. And what's interesting is, to the best of my knowledge, there has never been a rampage school shooting in an urban inner-city school. And sociologists believe that's because it's easier to find a place to belong. So again, the back and forth. And the final thing that really helps us understand why connectedness is so important is all of the rampage school shooters felt total marginalization at the hands of their peers. They were teased, taunted, ridiculed. I mean, it just went on and on. So when you're treated kindly, when you're connected, because it's a lot harder to hurt somebody you get to know, right? So I'll pass this one out. On one side are the 5 measures of connectedness. On the other side are then just these 2 bodies of research aligned. And on this one is my contact information if anybody wants that. But what I thought, before I just sort of stop and take a breath and let you ask some questions, is to let you know just a teeny bit about what working restoratively is. Because you will probably hear, you probably have heard, it was even mentioned at the Golden Globes the other night. They talked about restorative justice. I refer to this work pretty exclusively as restorative practices, and I'll tell you why. Restorative practices is the next step toward making schools the safest possible places they can be. And working restoratively, and this is kind of a little bit of a scary thing for folks. I think we all know that when a child misbehaves, the last thing that's going to help them behave better is to punish them. It doesn't work, it's never worked, and in fact, families know that. Families understand, whether we do it well or we do it poorly, that if kids don't know how to solve problems with their words, they have to be taught. And we have children who come in with all kinds of intellectual challenges, whether they're developmentally delayed, or they struggle with reading, or math, or choose your favorite level. It could be biochemistry. I don't care, it doesn't matter. Failing tests and so on. The last thing we do with a reader who is not up to snuff according to whatever measure you want is to say, you know what? 6 months at this, we've been trying to get you to read, 6 months, you're not getting it, so I'm going to suspend you for a week. Now you chuckle, I hear, what? Suspend a child for not learning? Of course we wouldn't do that. We would be negligent if we did that, right? But when it comes to behavior, somehow we think, well, you hit your brother? Let's talk about school, because families do a better job of this than schools do. But, you know, you turn off and you slug somebody because you're mad at them. And what do? We say you're out of here for a week. Which changes, doesn't give anybody any new tools in their toolbox, it just makes them madder. And I'll give you a pretty sobering statistic. There's a federal statistic. If a 6th grader is absent from school for 10 days or more within that year, and we're not talking about a bad case of the flu or chicken pox now, okay? But if we're talking about truancy, we're talking about being suspended, okay, if a child is out of school for 10 days or more during that 6th grade year, they have only a 30% chance of graduating from high school. So why do we keep doing it? Because we adults don't know what we don't know. And if the only tool in our toolbox is suspension or detention or something, I call it the island of punishment, that's all we do. So we adults have to learn some new tools. So I refer to restorative practice. I want to paint a big picture, and then you can ask me all kinds of questions about this or about bullying or anything you want. Restorative practices sort of works on what I call the family model. And here's the family model. Those of you who have children, or have nieces and nephews, choose your siblings, it doesn't really matter, you know that those children are what we call frenemies. Okay, playing beautifully together. I mean, think of yourselves growing up. I was the eldest of 5. I mean, frenemies. But, you know, they're playing beautifully. You think, wow, I did something right. They're really, and then you turn your back and they're like coming to blows and you're afraid they're not going to make it to dinner. So what we may say, well, we need to separate for a few minutes. Let's do something. You go up to your room. But at the end of the day, there's only one vehicle in which you're going to have to pour into to go to soccer or karate or dancing. There's only one table where everybody sits around and eats dinner together. I hope we're still doing that. There's only one destination for a family vacation. And if the world works right, our children will outlive us and they will have one another. So somehow we have to bring them back together. And some of us do it well and some of us do it poorly, but we have to, because that's what a family is about. But the school model typically is not even close to the family model. We have 2 kids who are going at it. And so what do? When we figure out, you know, who's guilty and who's innocent, we change lockers, we change bus routes, we change classes, we change lunchways, we do anything we can so these children never have to see one another again, which is ridiculous. That's not how the world works. Whether it's at the workplace, I mean, those of us, all of us work somewhere, and there's people we don't like, but somehow we have to get along. Boards of ed, we have to get along, because if we don't, we're not going to share the same space. We have to. So working restoratively is learning how to operate the family model. And there are particular strategies and there are particular skills. And they're based on, first of all, there's another basic principle of restorative practices, and that is that you have to build positive relationships and community. That is, I like to say, 80% of the work. I'm pulling that number out of the hat. I don't know whether it's 7 or 8 or 85. It's the majority of the work is building relationships and building positive community. And once you've built those relationships and that positive community in classrooms, on teams, throughout the school, then you can repair those relationships when harm has been done. So you're moving away from figuring out what rule was broken, who did it, you're guilty, you're innocent, you get suspended, you didn't get, all of that, and you say, let's use a different model. So it's not that suspension and detention and all of those, I call them punitive kinds of consequences, are just off the table, but they don't make sense anymore. Are there times when children have to be removed? Absolutely. You never sacrifice common sense or safety. But what we're trying to do is say we've got to repair those relationships because we're a class, we're a team. And there are concrete strategies and ways to do that. One of the foremost ways, and we had talked about being able to do this tonight, instead of having a forum in here, is to have a forum in a circle. Because when you're in a circle, everybody can see everybody else. You don't have to worry about somebody rolling their eyes or boards of ed. Could meet in a circle, change the dynamics immensely. Now, working in circles isn't the only thing you do in working restoratively, because again, the lion's share, 80%, is building that positive climate. That's the connections. So it's about building the relationships, And then you have the chance to repair them. If there's no relationship there, there's nothing to repair. So this is about getting off the island of punishment, moving away from you broke a rule and here's the consequence. I'll say something very frightening when you're working restoratively. That's very important. There can never, ever, ever, never, ever be predetermined consequences. There are always consequences. If somebody gives me a hug, there's consequences. If somebody slugs me, there's consequences, positive or negative. So there's always consequences, but those consequences are not predetermined. They're determined. They could be predictable. You have a child who, has fun in the cafeteria. That's a lovely place for custodians after a lunch wave, Whether it's intentional or unintentional, it's a mess because kids don't clean up their stuff. They may have a little food fight, they may be sloppy, again, intentional or unintentional, and we can be authority figures and say, clean it up. Or we can approach that student and say, what happened? Oh, well, I was just trying to get out because there's an intramural game, and what do we have to do to make this right? Well, I need to go back and clean it up. So the consequence is exactly the same, but the pathway to getting there is different. So I don't want anybody to think that when you're working restoratively, there are no consequences, rules, chaos, all that stuff. No, when you're working restoratively, there is more expectations, there's more control, there's less chaos, there's a lot more happiness, and so on. I'll recite for you the fundamental hypothesis of restorative, and just own this for yourself. Human beings are happiest, healthiest, and most likely make positive changes in their behavior when those in positions of authority do things with them rather than to them or for them. That's the entire foundation, that what we call the fundamental hypothesis, and it's learning how to do that. And at the root of working restoratively is helping adults, whether it's in a school or a district, put new tools in our own toolboxes, because working restoratively, it's not something you do. This is not a program. It's something you are. And once you're restorative, you don't go back. So I'll give you one more little picture, and then I'll stop for a minute. This is, let me explain this while I pass this out. This is my little diagram of what it means to work restoratively. And the reason why there are bubbles in the background is that people are like bubbles. They're all sharing space together. And when there's no strife and there's no, conflict, we're all just floating around sharing space. But sometimes there is conflict, because that's part of life. And the bubbles bounce into one another. And when they bounce into one another and move in the opposite direction, that represents repairing. And sometimes the conflict is so great that those bubbles explode. And that's when you might hear restorative justice. I was listening to the radio coming in, and they're talking about all of the backdrop of this, the sexual harassment that has been happening and being uncovered in a very, very profound way in the last few months. And they were talking specifically about restorative justice, about bringing victims and perpetrators together to heal, not to change sentences, but actually to hear from one another. Because until you can hear the impact of what you did, healing is not possible. So be listening. Restorative justice is a teeny part at the top. Restorative practices is creating that community and then repairing those relationships when harm has been done. What was I going to say? One second, because I go pretty good and then I lose my train of thought. I'll think of it. It doesn't matter. So anyway, we have to build a very positive foundation, positive relationships, and that's the house. We have to build a strong house, because once we build a strong house, think about, we've had lots of big storms. If you have a house and a tree falls on that house, you can repair the house. But if a tree falls and there's no house, there's nothing to repair. So working restoratively is about fostering connectedness. It's about creating positive community relationships so that when there is harm, intentionally or unintentionally, we can restore those relationships. So again, that's just in a very little nutshell where we're going. So why don't we, I think there's only for the camera, we've got a mic, right? Because they're taping this tonight. I hope I'm making sense. Very good.
Has anyone ever looked at the data in comparison to divorce rates?
Divorce rates?
Yeah. You're talking about the family and building a family, and when our divorce rates have gone up throughout the past decade or two, is there any link between that? Because now we have kids.
I don't know that exactly. I think common sense would tell us there is great impact. Since I have gone over the deep end into the world of restorative, I'm about focusing on the impact of what that does. I would assume as well that when kids blame themselves for the breakup of a relationship and don't have the opportunity to express how they're feeling, because that's part of being working restoratively, because again, this is who you are, it's not something you do, that has impact, it carries on. But that's not my area of expertise. That's just what common sense would tell me.
I would wonder, because if a child is seeing that the two people in their world aren't being restorative or not mending an issue, then that goes.
Well, I will tell you what you raise here is that, and I'll make another connection and see if this helps a little bit. We tend to think that kids who are bullies, and I say that in quotation marks because I hate the word, but kids who would be mean to one another, that they just feel bad about themselves, they have low self-esteem, they're trying to make up for it. That is so not true. The leading reason why kids are mean to one another is that they've had role models that have shown them how to do that have taught them by word and deed, more by deed than word, that this is how you treat others. So the question I get very often is, well, when you're working restoratively, does that mean that you're showing them that this world isn't, you're not preparing them for this world? No, you are giving them tools to help them wind their way in a much more profound way than just getting angry and exploding. So we have to change the role models. And that's what helps change, whether it's the circles of domestic violence or hurting others and so on. They have to understand the impact. And that's when things change. So I'm sort of a corollary of that. Other questions or comments or things you came hoping to learn tonight?
So this is just a tidbit that I learned in the school as a student. It's kind of a good feed off of Ms. Batchelder's question. But when I was here as a student, I had an English teacher named Lorraine Freiberg. And one of the things she told us, and it really goes to your connectedness, or she started with a question. She was very big on questions. I don't remember the data, but this would have been back in the 90s. She said they interviewed valedictorians all over the U.S., different school systems, different demographics, but they all had this one thing in common. And she asked the class, nobody actually got the right answer. She said, what do you think? The one thing in common, all these different valedictorians, all different parts of the country, all different backgrounds and demographics they had in common. The one and only thing, this was the answer that we got when I was in school, they all had dinner as a family. That was the one commonality between all the valedictorians that they interviewed at the time, which is really interesting. This goes to that connectedness. It goes to building support. So just something I learned in this school that seemed really fitting to
I think that that's definitely a contributory piece. What's interesting, and when I said at the beginning, I do a lot of professional development. We do 2-day training sessions on school climate. We do 2-day training sessions on restorative practices. And I've done this, I hazard to say, hundreds of times. It actually keeps me young, I think. And at one point in our training, we asked folks, I've done this again with hundreds of attendees and hundreds of sessions over the years. Think of a time when you were highly connected to your own school experience. Don't define it, just say when you felt truly connected. And then we take a piece of chart paper and we record what everybody says. And it's all about the relationships. So the valedictorians may say, we had a special relationship at the dinner table, but they also, if we delve deeper, each one of them had at least one adult at school, I am sure. But they went to their effect. So there's other things, but it all goes back to relationships. And where we started this black hole of what I call bully mania, we don't have relationships. So if we're going to fix it, we don't fix it by suspending and putting kids in detention and making them pariahs. What we do is we foster relationships and help them understand the impact of what they're doing so that they can improve. This is learning reading and learning how to treat others is the same in terms of we need skills. If we were lucky, we got them around the dinner table, but many of us don't have them around the dinner table. And I hazard to say, and if you come to the training sessions and we have parents, and we have police officers, and we have cafeteria, we have everybody. This is for every face. So anybody who's interested, just ask me. I'm doing it 2 times next week. We do it all the time. It's free. We have this little thing called a smartphone. And more, the volume's being turned up about the problems with technology. And I'll tell you what the biggest problem is. It's something we call displacement. And displacement means the more you're doing this, the less you're doing this. And that's what we're trying to rekindle when you're working restoratively. Again, this is how you do business. This isn't a program. It's not a discipline system. It's about understanding how you move through your day and how you foster relationships. And we're sitting in a school, and this school, the whole district, has a mission to make sure every student leaves very, very smart. I believed it for decades, don't lose your thought when you finish mine, and then you, is that from the inception of schools in this country, there have been 2 goals. Raise good people, raise smart people. I've never thought there's a choice that we have to choose, that we have to have time to do smart and we have to do time to do kind. It's not a choice. But if somebody backed me up against a wall and said, oh, you got to make a choice, I would 150% say we've got to raise good people. And we've got to think about that, because when school's a destination and we really want to be together as a community, that's when high-quality learning happens, and that's what the data shows. So, excuse me, sir.
Segue. Dr. Freiberg, I was wondering if there's any data that speaks to, I don't want to use the phrase bullying, but the group mentality, i.e. the mean girl,
Yep.
A quadrille of kids who might be upset or mean-spirited within the group. If there's any existing research or data that speaks to that, with both boys and girls.
Let me start with the boys. First of all, there's a lot of that, and I think that the overarching solution, again, is rooted in relationships. And it's rooted in raising young people who know what the right thing to do is and are willing to do it because they have others who will support them, all right? Boys, and boys and girls are very different beasts, whether we try to raise them the same or not. And for me, the 2 best go-to resources to learn about the culture of boys and girls is, she's become a very good colleague, friend, Rosalind Wiseman, who has written 2 books. The first one was called Queen Bees and Wannabes. You probably don't know that book, but that was the book that was made into the movie Mean Girls. So, Queen Bees and Wannabes, and about 5-7 years ago, she wrote a companion book on boys called Masterminds and Wingmen. And I'll be happy after to give you the references, but Rosalind Wiseman, Queen Bees and Wannabes, Mastermind and Wingmen. But there's been a huge amount of research on boys and girls. And the thing about boys is, in general, they're very different. If you want to ask a boy, you know, what happened, and those of you who have sons probably know this is true, you come home from school and you say, how was your day? Don't want to talk about it. You know, that grunting thing, or, you know, no, fine. Just 1 or 2 words. Don't ever ask a girl, how was your day, unless you're ready to sit there for 2 hours and listen. But boys will talk, engaged in activity. And of course there are notable exceptions, you know, but boys, so you know something's bothering them, go out, shoot hoops, even go for a drive, just don't look at me, and then start talking and it'll come out. Sometimes after the lights are out at night, they don't want to look at you. Girls, very different. They need that eye contact or they won't talk for the most part. But boys will do things in groups that they know individually they should not do. And there are some very tragic examples of this that have happened over the years. I know one I was called about by a radio station many years ago where a group of, it was 2 or 3, maybe 4 middle school boys walking home from school picked up a bottle that was lying on the ground and beat a group home resident to death. And the gentleman asked me, interview, is this normal behavior? I said, are you kidding me? Of course it's not normal behavior, but what is normal is for one to say, hey, let's do this. Let's do this. And the others are afraid to say no because they will be branded as weak and so on. And again, what we have to do is raise a culture of boys that say, that's not being a real boy. So boys are different that way. Girls, there is an incredibly complicated social pattern. And, you know, there's the queen bee, read Rosalind, she's fabulous, and she also writes with very good humor. So, again, the biggest solution, and it's too complicated to talk about the intricacy of girls, but they need to understand what the impact is on one another when they act this way. Boys too. Because we don't explore, when we're doing typical consequences or punishment, we don't explore what the impact was. We say, do your time. You're out for 5 days. Do your time, and we'll pretend nothing happened. And we dust the person off who's been hit and make sure they're not injured. And we don't talk to them about it. And we never bring them together. But in families, we do that. Because we have to.
My question is regarding more of the tools that you were talking about earlier and how to incorporate different tools. And I want to know what the school is doing to help implement meditative practices or even yoga or some type of outreach in that way so that when kids get worked up that they know what to have data supporting.
Well, I will turn that over to the schools, David. Let me frame that by saying we hear a lot about mindfulness. We hear a lot about yoga, we hear a lot about all kinds of things. For me, where I stand now, as old as I am, I have never in my professional career, and this is the work that I actually went to school to do. So I haven't changed professions. I've been lucky to have grown within the passion that I have for this stuff. But I've never in my life seen a bigger frame. And this frame, because that's what working restoratively is, it's a huge frame. It's not a program, it's not something we do. But that frame becomes a lens through which you can say, what's going to hang within this frame? And the work that I've been doing in climate, it turns out that's what we do. That's 80% of the work we have to build community. So when you're looking at yoga or mindfulness or any number of programs we could all list off, my response is, and I'm happy to turn it over to the school to say what they're doing, my response would be, does it fit within this frame or does it not? From where I stand, mindfulness, yoga absolutely fits in this frame. It's very consistent, but it's not the biggest picture. It's something you do to help you build community and to help fill toolboxes of children and adults to help them calm down or whatever, be calm before they start, use whatever example you want, or not immediately go to blows when there's a disagreement. But I think we make the mistake, and here's the blunt directness in me, I think we make the mistake of saying it's mindfulness, it's yoga, it's, and you know, character counts, it's this thing or it's that thing. These are wonderful pieces of this complicated puzzle, but the biggest frame is understanding we've got to build community, and then we've got to assess the impact and repair the relationships. Anything that's going to help us do that is so I don't know specifically what they're doing. I know I'm here not just as a one-time thing. I do work for the State Department, and I'm thrilled that this is, you know, I don't want to say the beginning of the journey, because for some of us, we've been working together for years and years. So this is where we're going. You start listening for the words restorative. This is the pathway. This is where we're headed. And you can either get on the train now or you can get on it later. But this is where we'll go, because the evidence will work. So I don't know if I answered that. I don't know if you want to tackle that.
Thank you for the question. Craig Cooke, Superintendent, and I'll open it up for administrators as well to jump in here. But do we do some of those things? Absolutely, and I think we're really just scratching the surface at that. I know at the middle school we're doing some mindfulness work. We have yoga as a class here at the high school. They're doing some things, certainly pre-K through 2 at that level, but we're I think just scratching the surface as Joanne mentioned. We're looking at that as really a frame. We've been a PBIS district for many years and spent a lot of time on positive behavior intervention supports and all those things. I know our families are very familiar with a lot of those efforts. I think we're very fortunate as a school district to have a social worker and a school psychologist in each of our buildings. I think that's not always the case. And I know as I talk to colleagues across the state that's rare for us to still have those supports, and we're very fortunate those staff members are utilized throughout the district. I don't know if Tracy, maybe I can put you on the spot as an elementary principal.
Strategy for at any moment when you might be having a moment. How to do trace the start and breathe in and out. And I even show the children, like sometimes Mrs. Peterson has to have a 5-star breathing opportunity for herself. Because we do want the children to believe that it's not something that we're doing to them, but that we all may be required to do. Most classrooms have it present. We give children individual stars. For some children who need maybe additional support, they tape it on their desk. So there are practices like that. We also have some really what we call Fun Friday activities, where yoga is an opportunity, but it's an opportunity for children just to learn those practices a part of their daily practice. So those pieces are definitely being incorporated, not just into the children who have difficulties, but for all of our students to have strategies, because I think the point is it's about creating that positive school climate and then giving all children the tools in order to know how and when to use them. I do have a question. So I think, I love your handout about punitive and restorative practices, and we are definitely, not just by state mandate, but just in our core belief system, moving that way. I work with the youngest of our learners, pre-K through 2nd grade, and something that I would be interested in additional guidance is, so how do we help train all stakeholders that the restorative practices actually take time to have impact and are more beneficial than the punitive. Often as the principal, people look for the punitive actions on our part, despite the fact that they often don't present with long-term lasting effects.
Here's how I'll sort of tackle that very important question. I started out saying that I'm the lucky person who receives the bullying complaints. A lot of those calls from family members usually start at that point. They didn't suspend, they didn't, all of that stuff. I didn't think anything was done, and so on. I find that in general, because I do a lot of teaching on the phone, when I start to talk about working restoratively versus punitively, and talk about the family model, and talk about what they really want, what's your goal here? Do you want it to stop? Do you want your child to be safe? Well, yes. Well, then let's talk about the best pathways to get there. And I don't mince words. And I don't because I'm impatient. I've learned to be very patient. But everybody can't be right. And I think that if we can start to educate parents and have more forums like this, where you can talk about what's your goal? What do you really want to happen? What's the best way to get there? And usually when I say to a parent, if your child struggled with, your multiplication tables, do you think suspending them for a week would help? And they all, come on, you're kidding me. Well, it's the same. Somebody who solves problems by turning around and slugging somebody needs different skills. So this is an educative process. And for the most part, they get it. They just have never heard that before. So I didn't bring enough of those. I do want to make sure you get my practical steps for dealing with bullying. I forgot about that one. But I have some really good articles on working restoratively. I didn't bring enough of it. It's called Defining Restorative. Anybody they're going to post it, I think, but anybody who wants me to email it to you directly, I'll be happy just on that connectedness handout. I'll send it out. I could inundate you with stuff. What I will say is schools, and I'll say this for the administrators in this room, if you really want to lead a restorative school or a restorative district, I cannot stress enough how important it is for you to get training. Because this is not a delegation thing. This isn't something where you can say, yeah, I believe in it, I'll send 3 people and come back. That's not how this works. It's about a transformative experience in really, really understanding what it means to work restoratively. And I'm very proud to say that at this point, and this may not sound like a big deal, I kind of feel like sometimes a stealth operation, but there have been about six or more superintendents, certainly a lot more people from central office, 6, and a whole handful of assistant superintendents who have actually come to training. And in those districts where they are leading districts, and individual schools for that matter, where the district may not be on board yet, but the school is really moving in that direction, they have almost completely done away with suspension. And in districts that have taken this on, expulsion is just not happening. That's not to say there aren't consequences. And when people break the law, they are still subject to whatever the consequences are. But when you start to think restoratively, it changes the landscape. Because we don't want children to be away from school. They have to be in school. That's their ticket to being successful. So I'll urge you. Okay, so there's a couple more.
I have a question about how you discussed a 6th grader who's out of school for 10 days has a 30% chance of
Graduating high school.
graduating
That's a
high
federal statistic, and of course, not every 6th grader who's out of school for 10 days or more, but what we're talking about there is a pattern of when we send kids out and we say we don't want you and so on, and they have no reason for coming, so they're truant. Why continue on?
So my question is, how do we fix that damage that was created by the punitive punishments, especially someone who usually when they get started on that path, it happens to them multiple times. So how do we fix that for them to be able to succeed?
Well, again, it's rooted in creating relationships, and they have to trust that when they come into an administrator's office, that they're going to be heard, and that they're going to be a part of figuring out how we're going to make it right. I didn't mention as part of the tools, so it's simple and I can describe it in 2 sentences. It's much more complicated because those very children don't trust us. They don't think we're fair. And one adult stands for a whole lot of adults, so it's a matter of building relationships and trust and understanding that we're going to do business a little bit different. If you think about your children and they do something wrong, and some of you have left them at home and you told them, you know, take your bath or your shower and make sure that you put your dishes away and that kind of stuff, you're going to walk in and that won't be done, right? And the first thing you're going to say is, why didn't you do that? That is the one question that needs to be totally removed from your vocabulary. Why? And instead, start with, what happened? And then listen. And at the end of it, there's a whole bunch of questions. I mean, they're very simple, common sense, but then well, how can we make this right? And most of the time I say, oh, wow, I lost track of time. I'll go take my shower right away and you know, the dishes will be put away, but okay, that's the consequence. It's fixed, they're learning. Because once we start to work restoratively, and they're part of determining what the consequences will be, again, this is such a brief overview, but we're part of it, they begin to trust that we actually mean it, and will listen, and that you're part of the solution. We're not doing it to you, we're doing it with you. Is that sort of?
I'm looking over the bullet points here for what children should do if they're being bullied. And these are some of the suggestions that I've made to my children throughout their educational career. Both of them are in high school right now. And they say they're not going to tell anybody. They don't want to deal with the consequences that the kids are going to do to them if they go and they say something. So how is the school, especially the high school, how are they dealing with this situation? You have a lot of kids, because from what my kids tell me, is that there are parents who get their children to come in and beat up other kids or to create fights and to keep going. If the relationship at home isn't being fostered to be respectful at school, not even to their teachers or to the administration, then how do you start fixing this problem? Our kids can only do so much.
Well, let me just say that this is the problem, that we have a culture where it's okay to hurt one another. In fact, we're getting better at hurting one another. And the more distance we have with every kind of technology, it's fine. You think about going out to dinner. You go out to dinner to break bread with somebody, and you look over and there's 2 people who are just sitting, you know, 2 yards. So this is the problem. And if we build relationships, I keep saying that as though that's really simple, but if we're doing it in the hallways, in classrooms, and that is the top priority, I guarantee you that despite that whole culture of not telling someone, they will tell. And there's not an educator in the high school, and tell me I'm wrong, those of you, I don't know who's from the high school, there's not an educator from the high school who doesn't hear daily what's going on. And the ones who hear the most are the ones with the best relationships. And children who are coming, and those educators know how to get that information back without ever letting that student know that that information was taken. But becoming a restorative school or becoming a restorative district, and I would change the language just a little bit to make a point, not to be critical at all, but when you say, you know, my kids are bullied, I would just say when your kids are on the receiving end of hurtful, I don't care what you label it, okay, just so we stop using that word. But, I don't want to lose my train of thought. when you're working restoratively, you are focused on building those relationships first and foremost, because that's your pathway to stopping the enemies. Oh, I know what I was going to say. Becoming a restorative district is a 3 to 5 year process. Why does it take that long? This is not like going to a professional development and turnkeying a new way to teach reading or chemistry or math or something like that. This is becoming somebody different. It's moving off what I call the island of punishment to the world of restorative. And that is an educational journey. This is a true journey. Schools can do it much quicker. A school, if the leader gets fully trained, when I say that, understands, not just knows about, but understands what it means to be restorative, works with all of the stakeholders to bring those folks along so they understand as well, so that when there's an issue, the parent doesn't come in, I'm just using this as an example, you know, screaming and yelling and breaking down walls, and I gotta talk to somebody that says, we need a restorative circle. And that happens. I have all kinds of videos that demonstrate this. One of my favorite districts to talk about that became restorative over the past probably 10 years ago is Oakland, California. Now, I like to talk about Oakland for a couple of reasons. One reason is I was born in San Francisco, and my undergraduate degree is from Berkeley. Berkeley's next to Oakland, and I know Oakland really well. But Oakland is Bridgeport, Connecticut without the snow. And if any, and Oakland may be a little bit bigger than Bridgeport, but Oakland and Bridgeport share a lot in common, other than this awful winter cold. And they were doing the same thing over and over and over, and perpetrating this culture. High suspensions and expulsions and fights and tardies and absences and all the beans we like to count. And they said, we can't continue to do the same thing. So they embarked on this journey, and from district leadership on down to administrators and bringing families and school, they have become a restorative district. They just do things different. They get more done. Because when the article on defining restorative talks about sort of translating that, I call it the fundamental hypothesis. People are happier, healthier, and most likely to make positive changes in behavior when those in positions of authority do things with them rather than to them or for them. There's something called the social discipline window. And it has two scales. One is support, nurturance, love, it can be material support, and so on. And the other scale, the vertical scale, is about control. Expectations, boundaries, rules. We need that. This is not chaos out here when you're working restoratively. What working restoratively is about is providing all kinds of support. Love, let me say it the opposite way. All kinds of very high expectations. Your homework's due here, you need to work with these other 3 people, this is what you need to get done by the end of the day. You have all these agreed upon assumptions about how we're going to treat one another. All that kind of stuff is there, a lot of it, but it's coupled with the support to be successful. Here's what I expect. What do you need to be successful? I'm going to make sure you have that. That's working restoratively, as opposed to throwing out expectations and so on, and then, sort of backing off and saying, do it. I mean, again, there's an awful lot in working restoratively. But that's the problem, is we have a culture. So how do we get into this culture? We've got to get out of it. And we get out of it by learning what it means to be restorative. You either are a restorative person, or you're not, or you're journeying to that place. It's not something you do. Oh, I know, the last little picture I wanted to create with you is becoming restorative is sort of like growing up. Babies are born, give or take, 7, 8 pounds, 20, 21 inches long. And if nothing happens with accident or disease, babies grow until they become adults like we are, right? And when we get up in the morning, wake up, we have all kinds of choices we can make. What am I going to have for lunch? What am I going to wear? What errands can I run after I run? We have all kinds of choices we can make. But one of the choices we cannot make is to say, wow, today I'm going to be 9 years old and 3 feet tall. We can't make that choice. That's not the choice we have. So when you become restorative, it's kind of like growing up. You are restorative, and you don't go back because that other life is just not, you don't go back. So this is something you become, you are. And that's why it becomes a lens, and any school or district can take inventory, and same thing at home, of what you're doing and how you're managing living. And once you start to understand what it means to live out that fundamental hypothesis, you say, wow, I'm going to keep doing this, but I got to stop doing that. Because it becomes the filter. So I don't know, this is a true journey. It's not an easy journey, but if we keep, it's the definition of insanity is to keep doing the same thing over and over. And Connecticut, I believe will become the first restorative practices state in education. I believe that. So, but this is a journey we're all sort of taking together.
Hello, I'm a student at Windsor High School, and I just wanted to touch upon like what we said before on the amount of support we have in our schools. I feel like indeed there isn't enough publicity put on outlets for support. For example, like in my classrooms, we were talking to each other, and I was just asking, like, do you guys know these little support outlets we have in our school? And many said no. So I was just saying that a way for us to show our students that we have like these outlets of support in our school, we should announce it more on the morning announcements, announcing this at lunch, make our teachers say it, and have our leadership group mainly like talk about it, like maybe at an assembly or something, just so everyone knows that we have everything available here at our school.
Well, let me just say that becoming a community is doing just that. So it's knowing what everybody else is doing, it's supporting one another, and it's just the culture of, how we live. So, absolutely. I probably, in my own sort of blunt and direct way, quelled any kind of conversation around the B words. I didn't mean to do that. I just was trying to get us in a pathway out of that sort of dark place. Yes, Lucy.
Are there any school systems, whether it's, Connecticut or New England, that are undertaking this?
Oh, yes.
And then, how will we find out more information about how they're doing and stuff along those lines?
Well, I know about them through conversations that I have. Let me put another little shameless plug in, and I gave Mr. Sills a stack of these. There is a model school climate policy that was written in 2013, 2014. Westbrook, Connecticut took the lead in writing the first in the nation real school climate policy. That school climate policy has been adopted at the Board of Ed level by 4 districts that I know of: Westbrook, Portland, Stratford, and Newtown. Others are using that policy or are on the path to, and the reason why I say this is that it's probably the only policy in the board policy handbook that talks about what we're trying to do as opposed to what we're trying or what you can't do. And Connecticut Association of Boards of Education gave it its own number. Law firm of Shippen and Goodwin sort of co-wrote it along with national partners and so on. And it supports working restoratively. And I'll say something else I haven't said, is that at the center of those, of this model school climate policy, which I'll encourage anybody to read, to look at, to consider adopting at your board level, are the National School Climate Standards. There are 5 National School Climate Standards, the 4th standard of which is the spirit of the anti-bullying law. So there are a lot of growing number of districts that are becoming restorative. Here in Connecticut, we started really with a very strategic process in 2016. So if you think it takes 3 to 5 years, this is a work in progress. But I'll tell you, I saw the superintendent in Stratford a few months ago, and she very happily told me she's been through training, as has her assistant superintendent, and about, I want to say, close to 300 of their faculty and staff throughout the district over the last couple of years. And where they had the typical number of expulsions, low double digits of expulsions every year, she was thrilled to tell me was past year 0. And that's just expulsions, that the suspensions have gone up. I know at Westbrook High School, as a superintendent who's leading another restorative district, they have done away with their in-school suspension. They've repurposed it. They don't need it anymore. Now that, please don't get me wrong. This is not to say there are no consequences. But the consequences are about repairing the harm, not just doing time. Kids sometimes they need chill time, but they don't need to do time. And there's a big difference. So there are a lot. And I could tell you more individually, but yes. And Bridgeport, they have 4 pilot schools that have embraced this. And I have a couple very nice, glitzy little documents about how their suspensions, and that means attendance has gone up, engagement has gone up. It's not just about the bean county. So yes, there are.
I just want to piggyback on that last question with Mr. Dobbs. My name is Oyo Son, I'm principal here at Windsor High School. To answer in response to your question, we've actually scheduled a conference call with you in your office. I'm not sure if you've seen the email exchanges. We've been corresponding with Betty Duras. You don't know that yet, but so we're going to introduce restorative work this spring. Okay, and the idea is to scale it out next year across the entire campus. So I've seen the email correspondence between yourself and one of our assistant principals. We look very much forward to that conference call.
And I really, again, this is a journey. You have to start at some point, and I think I'm so happy. I mean, it's worth it to me just to hear that folks are interested in this work. But let me just give one cautionary note. When you hear people talk about exclusively restorative justice, usually they're talking about a perpetrator and a victim and bringing it together. And this is so much bigger than that. That's why I talk about restorative practices, because it's about building that community, so building the house, so when the tree falls in the house, there's something to build. If there's no relationship, you can't repair anything. So it's about creating that positive climate so that you can repair it. And so it's the whole framework. It's not just about the high-end things, it's much bigger than that. Everybody's probably had it, right? I'm happy to linger, or if there's another question.
Hi there, thank you. This is very informative. I wish the room was more packed, but I'll send word. You said it takes some time, maybe 3 to 5 years to just see from beginning to end, just the full impact. So what would you say the start should be? Does it start when the Board of Education gets trained, then the administrators get trained? I know you already said that here at the high school. Where does it start? Does it start at the high school and trickle down to the elementary schools?
It starts anywhere you're willing to start. I mean, there is not, think about working with people. So this is a huge start. And I'm thrilled that it's being taped. And I'm having dealt with CTN for years and years. I'm amazed at how many people flip through channels at 3 in the morning. So the room is bigger than just those who are here. But I think it starts where people are willing to learn more. I'm particularly pleased that the board is here because it's about policy. I understand that, but it's also about changing hearts and minds. So we're not playing soccer these days, but we're playing basketball. So we can talk about all kinds of things, but we can talk about this. You can learn about becoming restorative, parents, faculty, I don't care, anywhere you're willing to start. I think ideally, leadership has to say, this is where we're going, and create some kind of strategic plan and move forward and see what has to be in place. But short of that, there are some amazing things happening without that in place. And it's the stories and the data that start to say, wow. And it's feeling like, wow, it's a happier place. This is a happy school. This is a place where people want to be. But one of the things we're doing as we grow, as well as we're creating, I don't even know what to call it. I don't want to call it a coaching model, I don't want to, but some way of helping schools who are on this journey invite us to do a walkthrough. Because we know what a restorative school or even a classroom would look like. So we'll come. We'll walk through with you and we'll say, here's what we see. Keep doing this. This is how we treat others. This is not a gotcha. In order to be restorative, you're constantly, you always have to work with people. So I don't know if that's but I'll take it wherever I can get it. I do have a few handouts if anybody's interested in just some restorative questions so you can start using them tonight at home and you walk in and they're not doing what you think they should do. Changes the dynamics, but, and you can, no harm done even without training, but I have a small stack of handouts.
Joanne, do those work with spouses as well?
Oh, yeah, don't ask anybody why.
I'll give it to my wife.
I have a video, I have a great video of a middle school principal from Baltimore. Baltimore's a restorative district, Oakland, San Francisco, Pittsburgh, I mean, I can't even name all of them. This is all over the world, all over the world. People are becoming restorative because what we're doing just isn't working. And the principal says, you know, I now use it at home. It's made me a better, it's a great video. Yes. Yes. Not just for them.
I'm just curious, since we're hearing all about the restorative process and Windsor's kind of shown that we have an issue here across all grades, is this the direction that we're taking? Or is this for just who's here to go home and start using this for our families?
Can I pass the mic up?
I think that's a great question. You know, we view this really one part to talk about bullying and to really share, you know, what bullying was, define bullying, and give some information about that. But then restorative is a piece of a puzzle out there. And so it's not something that, you know, myself as the superintendent would make a decision solely on that, or you know, I think the board would make a decision solely on that and go off in that direction without some more research or community discussion, things like that. But it definitely is something that we've seen schools implement, you know, on a limited basis, and seen some success with that. But I don't see that as solely the way we would address, you know, the concerns out there right now. But I do think it has a lot of merit to investigate further.
And I would also say that when I'm talking about in terms of solution, does not ignore the fact that things are happening to kids right now and that things need to be done. The questions to make it better and stop it. The question is how you do that. Because you can, as somebody said a bit ago, you start looking at who's sitting in detention or who's being suspended. It's the same kids over and over and over. It's not, you know, a one-time thing. So you have to, but sometimes it does mean total separation. And you're not going to lose your mind. But there are good strategies for intervening and good strategies to intervene working restoratively. so that ultimately they do understand impact safely.
Ladies and gentlemen, as Dr. Freiberg indicated, is the beginning of the journey. We have classrooms in this district now that operate on restorative practices already. And so we've seen pieces of that. We have schools that are exploring pieces of it. We have lots of work that's ongoing. This workshop was really designed around that issue of what is bullying. And as you indicated, it's a big word that we use to describe a whole vast assortment of mean-spirited behaviors. And the bigger question is, how do we get rid of it? And so the get rid of it part is not quick or easy, but it is based on relationship and creating relationship in schools. And so a lot of the work that we've done in the district, all of our schools have lots of interventions already that are working to do that. That doesn't mean that those mean-spirited behaviors don't happen, and that doesn't mean we don't have problems we have to address, so we have to continue to deal with those. What this does mean, though, as a district moving forward, is that we need to proactively continue to think about how do we create safe schools that are intellectually, physically, emotionally safe for all of our students so that all of our kids can learn at the highest potential. Because a lot of our kids are not hit, a lot of our kids are not taunted, a lot of kids are not teased, but our kids are still not performing at the level we want them to because for a lot of reasons they don't feel like school is connected to them. We have great kids who fly under the radar and don't accomplish nearly what they could simply because they don't feel connected. That's the video, we'll have it on YouTube and have the link for everybody. Please begin talking to everybody you know about this issue, and also talk particularly to your school administrators at the schools that you belong to. Talk about what do we do, what are the next steps for us, because there are 100 next steps. Right? There's not one big leap, there's not a program, we don't buy a box and take it off the shelf and do 3 weeks of training in the summer and suddenly the world is fixed. But there are lots of little steps, big steps that we can take. So please be proactive, please be communicative, and please give me an opportunity to thank Dr. Joanne Freiberg for giving us